Good evening, everybody. David McCoy here, Ochimo Properties / Real Estate Matters. It's still weekend, and so I'm still dressed down. I'm wearing my realtor shirt again because I love my realtor shirt. But I am continuing the series for frequently asked questions on commercial real estate. These last several videos we've been focusing on landlords and sellers, the kinds of questions that they might have. So tonight I thought we'd talk about a question I get a lot. It's, why aren't we getting many showings? So my last video actually probably ran about twice too long, and I talked a little bit about that, but I want to go back and discuss some of those things again. And one of the things we talked about is, when you're setting up a listing, there are a lot of things to consider, and it takes a while for a commercial listing to kind of get going. You have a lot of things that you have to consider. But so when you're setting it up, you have to think about signage. Is the signage right? Now, we don't always have good control of that with commercial real estate. It depends. If we are doing something, say, in an office building, and you maybe just have a suite in that office building or a condo in that office building, there may not be any outside signage available, and that sometimes happens even with standalone buildings. You may have city ordinances that will not allow you to have signs on the exterior of the building, and so you have to get around that. That's not necessarily the kiss of death. I do think there are a lot of people who feel like that we're past that stage anyway, that in today's world, people find things online and signs just aren't that important. I disagree with that. I think the signs are important, but that's a topic that I'll save for another video. If signage is possible, I think it is important to try to have a good sign. The other thing is it needs to get on the listing service. If it is on the listing service, one thing, we're on an online world now, and with residential real estate, I think the number is now, I know it's above 90, I think it's even 95% or 96% of all potential buyers first shop online. The commercial world is a little different. It's not quite that high, but it is increasing. More and more people are looking online before they ever call about a spot, before they ever call a broker or anything else. They're online looking at things. And that means that the visual part is very important. They used to say that for a residential listing, this was a few years back, they said you needed to have probably at least 20 pictures before someone would look at it. If they were browsing through the listings and it didn't have that many pictures, they would skip it. I think it's now more like 40 or 50 pictures. Commercial real estate doesn't do that as much. Lots of times you may only have 1 or 2 pictures. And I would say that's a bit of a challenge. I would say that if the property is in good shape and it looks good and it shows well, you should follow their lead and have a bunch of pictures. But with commercial property, sometimes you have warehouse space, sometimes you are rebuilding space, and so it looks rough right now. And that's hard to say. I think that if you put a picture like that up, sometimes you can't even get them to come take a look. So there's a little bit of a challenge there with that. When you put it on the listing platform, is it getting shared with other platforms? That can be a good thing or a bad thing. My experience has been that it somewhat depends upon the property. If your property is one that is probably going to be leased by people locally, then the most important thing is that it is on the local platform. That seems obvious. But sometimes you'll have things that are really, at least have the potential for someone to come in regionally or maybe even nationally. possibly even internationally. And so I wouldn't say that you have to do that for every property, but if you have a property like that, you want to be sure that that's being shared so that it can be seen nationally or regionally. And so these days, most of the local platforms offer an option where they can push it out to other areas. You kind of have to keep an eye on it because it doesn't post to everything, and there may be some that you selectively want to add in addition to that. That can be important. Social media, we are getting to the point where, old school, we'd put things in the newspaper, and there are still some people who want to put stuff in the newspaper, but in my opinion, these days the newspaper is just a waste of money. Almost nobody looks at those ads, and I cannot remember the last time somebody came and looked at a property because they saw it in a newspaper. But social media is a different story. That is super important for residential real estate, and I would say it's also important for commercial real estate, and getting more and more so. But you have to select the right places to put it. I wouldn't say that you should never put it on Facebook because I think you should, but it's unlikely that you're going to get your tenant or buyer from Facebook. You might, but it doesn't hurt for it to be on there. But it probably is going to come through a different platform, maybe LinkedIn or some of the others that might be available. But one of the things that we really need to think about is you need to think about your property. We talked before about how we have some properties that are Class A and some that are Class B or C or even D. And so I guess what I want to say there is those are very distinct populations. If you have a building that is a Class C or D building, if it is rough space and you are marketing to the people that might rent Class A space, you're not hitting the right people. You have to hit the people that would be leasing that space. Now, I can understand the nature of your building. If you want to be careful about who you're leasing to. If you lease to people that are bad credit risk or that won't do a long-term lease or things like that, that can create problems down the road. I understand that, but you have to be realistic about who you are directing your marketing toward. And you also have to review it from time to time because you may have an idea and you may be sure that that's the right idea, but if it's not hitting anybody, then you may need to rethink your assumptions about that. If you do have a building like that, and you are competing with a group of people that are perhaps, maybe they're startups. I'm not saying that they're bad businesses or bad people. They might just be newer companies that don't have a strong financial history yet. But you, of course, would want to try to aim for the top of that. And you need to kind of think about what these people might be looking for and how you might adapt to them. One thing is lots of times these smaller companies, both because they're hoping to grow a lot and also because of the financial risk, they would prefer to have a short-term lease. And so you may or may not be able to accommodate that depending upon, and so that goes back to, this is, I'm going to give you a house flipping analogy, and that is if you buy a building, and you do this with a flip. If you're buying a house to flip, you need to have an idea when you buy it of how much you think you can get that house to sell for. So the same thing is true with commercial. How much do you think you can get this building to sell for? Or how much do you think you can get it to lease for? And knowing that should set the limits on both how much you should pay to buy that building and how much you should spend to renovate that building. Because if you go way above that, you either will be losing money, or you won't be able to afford to lease it out. People won't be able to afford to go in there. So you have to think about that. So you need to think about who your target population is. The other thing is you need to know about what your market is like. I'm going to do a little bit more in depth on this, I think, in another video. It'll cover some of the same information, but I mentioned in a previous video about you know, an analysis I did of some stuff downtown recently. And so in 2019, I went back and I looked at the number of recorded leases. Now, this is not a complete census. There will be some things that were done outside of the database that we had, but we don't know what those were. So, but this is good information because it matches up. So we know how many things were on that listing service at a particular time, how many things were listed for lease. We know how many leases were reported as being done on that listing service, and we know the sizes of those leases. We don't always know how much, which is a bit of a challenge in terms of figuring out, you know, how to price, but you have an idea because you have a rough idea what people are asking. But based on that, in that particular year, there were 25 leases signed. So it was, and this is in one particular area, it's the downtown area. It was the central business district. So 25 leases signed in that period. And in that period, so right off the bat, it's about 2 per month. Not that many. So you have to kind of be on top of it. You need to try to do that. So out of those leases, the average lease size was under 6,000 square feet. I think it was 5,500 or 5,700 square feet. Well, you know, that's a pretty decent size space. But if you go a little bit further and then you take the median lease size, the median lease size was only 3,300 square feet. So what does that tell you? It tells you that half of the leases signed in 2019 in that area were 3,300 square feet or less. The reason the average is much higher is that there were a few very large leases that were signed, and that when you throw them into the average, it brings the average up quite a bit. So there you go. You think about that. Well, you know, half of the people only needed 3,300 square feet or less, and you also get to the point where some of those below there are too small for your building. So when you get into that, you begin to see that it's a limited group, and you need to think about who these people are. If these people are, I mean, it's one thing to say, well, there were these people looking for that. I get that. But you need to try to think about what things might we be able to do for these people that would make us a better choice. You know, if you don't have parking, is there a way that you can, you know, secure parking for them? If it doesn't have windows, is there something about the building that you can do to make it more attractive or more cool? Are there some amenities that maybe you can add? It might also be that the right thing to do would be to repurpose the building. That depends upon zoning, location, a lot of things, but it shouldn't be something that you discard out of the way. In fact, we had that happen in our downtown area in Louisville, Kentucky, a number of years ago. Over a few years, a lot of our Class B space, people started buying up those buildings, and they were reconfiguring it, sometimes connecting several buildings that were contiguous all together and making repurposing it for some of it was hotel space, some of it was Airbnb space, some of it was museum space, things that you wouldn't normally think about. And that's not the thing to do in every case. And again, before you do that, you have to have that same calculation I talked about earlier. You know, if I do that, what can I expect the rent to be? Is the demand for that better? You know, is there more demand for that space in that way? And if so, how much should I spend to make that work? You know, what is that market like? So you have to think about that. But a lot of it is really, you know, you need to be able to attract those people, and you need to be able, so that's one thing. In another video, we're going to talk about, well, I had some showings, why didn't that work? But that's one thing, is if you are in a very competitive market, you may only have one shot at these people. And so you need to try to do everything you can to make sure that you know, you make your very best impression on the first time. In some ways, you know, you tell people, well, the landlord is willing to do these things, and it may very well be true. And I'm not saying that you know, I'm not saying you should spend a fortune doing it, but if I'm someone looking at space, and one, the space is done and it looks beautiful, and it meets my needs, that's critical. But the other space is in rough condition, but I'm being told, well, the landlord's going to fix it up for you. Well, I might believe that, but I don't have enough information. It's like, well, how do I know what it will look like when they finish it out? I mean, they're telling me they will do that, but it's not that way now, and I don't know what to expect. And I also don't know this landlord, and how do I know that, you know, that I can rely on that promise? So you have to think about those things. And again, I'm not saying that you know, go ahead and finish it out, because that can be a bad move too. You can spend a lot of money and it just doesn't suit your person. But you have to be able to show them the vision. You have to be able to convince them that this is the right spot. So I think I've run longer than I wanted to again tonight, but that's how you should think about these things. How you get people to come look. What you need to do when they come look. And we'll talk more about, you know, hey, when people come and look, how come I didn't get further than that? So we have a lot of things we're going to talk about down the road. But I'm going to call it good for tonight. I appreciate you all watching. I hope that you found this useful. If you did, I hope you'll click like for me. If you know someone you think might benefit from this, I hope you will share it. And also, if you'd like to see some of these in the future, I promise they won't all be long. So click subscribe. And please, if you have any questions, comments, I'd love to hear them. As I said, coming up, I'm going to continue the commercial real estate for a while. The next one may very well be international real estate. And also, I'm considering doing a few of these in Spanish. I want to do some in Spanish down the road, but I'm kind of debating how that might work, whether or not I do English and Spanish, or just do one language or the other and just kind of mark it. And I'd like your feedback on that, how you think that would go. So enough for tonight. Thank you again for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Have a good evening. Good night.